Welcome to the Aftershock. I'm Phil Leyva. I'm here with Colin Etnire, Alex Morgan, and we have a special guest joining us this afternoon, Alicia Rodriguez. Welcome, Alicia. Thanks for coming on to the show. We are following a 1-0 Quakes loss on a Tanner Beeson own goal here. We're going to have a lot of time to talk about this match as we await the press conference, and we'll have some thoughts afterwards as well. But Alicia, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to you first for your initial thoughts regarding the match. Now, you cover both of these teams for SB Nation, and so you know quite a bit about both of them. What are your thoughts after the 1-0 loss for the Earthquakes?
Yeah, I thought it was one of those games where I think both teams played pretty hard. I think both teams could claim that they should have gotten something from it. I think the Galaxy edged it in terms of quality chances until the end, and then the Quakes really pushed at the end, and they tried to go for the trademark late rally and rousing equalizer, but just didn't get it. But I also think that the Quakes, this is kind of a continuation of what we've been seeing for the last several games, where they play really pretty well and they just have a momentary mistake or a little bit of unlucky play, and then they don't get the result. And I think that this was another example of that.
And Alicia, you joined us, the Quakes Epicenter, that is. You talked to Jamin Moore midweek about the match, looking forward to it. And you mentioned that both teams would have an opportunity to play their style, right? The Quakes would finally have maybe a little more open play, chances to go out there and play the way Matias wants them. Same thing with the Galaxy under Greg Vanney. With that in consideration, do you have any further thoughts considering the styles of play that we saw in the match today?
Yeah, I think that the Galaxy did what they sought to do in not getting too slow and too static, because I think that's something that the Quakes could have feasted on. I think a couple of the young players in particular did a good job in trying to push the field and keeping San Jose honest in terms of their defending. At the same time, I think that this was a more open game for San Jose. They did have opportunities, and they did not have an opponent who was sitting deep and trying to weather the pressure. They were really pushing, and they got some counterattacking opportunities, and we hadn't seen that the last few games. So I do think that both teams got to play a version of their game, and it just came down to that big toe from Tanner Beeson, unfortunately. And I thought he had a really good game otherwise, and it's kind of a bummer because I think he had a game just like this last year too, right? He played pretty well, and he had an own goal in that game, and tough luck for the guy. I mean, I know it's the role of center backs, but I felt kind of bad for him.
Yeah, it's a pretty tough break considering his performance. Alex or Colin, if you guys want to jump in here regarding some of these thoughts, because I think Alicia's kind of on it in terms of Tanner Beeson and kind of the fan reactions. I was looking on Twitter. It seemed like it was just an unfortunate instance and an overall good performance. Your thoughts, Colin? What do you think?
I think that was one of the better of their, obviously this is the fourth loss in a row, and it's you can't take that context away from this. This was not a bad performance necessarily, but it is the fourth in a row. Tanner Beeson was unlucky or the Quakes were unlucky to concede in that manner, but they weren't unlucky to concede, period. There were a couple of real sharp chances that the Galaxy didn't quite convert that they could have, both before and after that. Paul Marie makes this miraculous sliding hook challenge when I don't remember, it was Grandsir, I think, was kind of breaking away at that point. So for me, I think that the Quakes were lucky to be in it with 10 to 15 minutes left. But then obviously once they got into that phase of the game, then they started applying some real pressure. And they generated actually a fair number of half chances. They didn't generate that many, great chances. And I think that that's something that they have to think about. They took a lot of pot shots from, 18 to 25 yards out. And that's why Jonathan Bond has 25, or what was it? I don't know, 15 saves on the night. I think that this is a game that was kind of tipped in Galaxy's direction throughout most of it, but not a terrible game by any stretch of the imagination for San Jose.
I mean, I don't think this was as bad as their losses to, Seattle, Portland, even Sporting Kansas City. But I think I'm a little more pessimistic about this one than you guys are. I just think that the Galaxy dictated the tempo. They dictated the control of the game for, the majority of the match. I think the Quakes really struggled in the midfield without Jackson Ewell, especially in the build-up. Their build-up just looked really uninspired. They were struggling to work the ball through the midfielders, and they really didn't create any chances of note for the first hour. until they brought on Chris Wondolowski and Shea Salinas, and then they started piling pressure forward, and that's when they looked more dangerous. And they really should have finished some of those chances. I mean, they've in the first 4 games of the season that they played, they scored 10 goals. In the last 4, they only have one goal in their last 4 games, and that's just not good enough. I think a little bit of it is luck. Obviously, sometimes you just go on unlucky streaks. But it's also finishing. I think Andy Rios had another chance that he really should have finished in this game. And there were a couple of other looks where I think if the Quakes had been a little more clinical, that they should have put it away. And in the end, I think the Galaxy were the more deserved winners here. And I think this is a concerning streak now for Matias Almeyda. And it almost feels like he's, struggling to assert himself, struggling, to have the Quakes assert their style of play. They're playing a lot more reactively on the back foot than they did at the beginning of the season.
So I think one instance that we could point to that very much shows that point that you just made in striving to enforce his style of play into the game would be around the 62nd minute when the Quakes made their initial subs, right? This was Shea Salinas coming in for Chofis. We had Wondolowski coming in for Cade Cowell, and then Paul Marie also came in for Lopez. And then it was almost like you could see a shift in the attack. There was a very noticeable difference. And Alicia, feel free to jump in here too if you'd like, regarding the shift in the attack and the way LA Galaxy responded to it. But I don't know if you noticed this, guys, or if I'm just crazy, but there was a really just obvious shift here. And it felt like the Quakes were pushing to actually, get on the board, come away from LA with points, which obviously didn't happen. But just if any of y'all want to jump in, your thoughts about these changes, these tactical changes that Matias Almeyda made to assert himself at this point in the match, 62nd minute. I
mean, it looked like it was really well set up for a sort of classic Chris Wondolowski late game winner, kind of smash and grab. It looked like it was really set up for that because the Quakes had sort of weathered a lot of chances in the first half. They'd had a really good last-ditch save from Tanner Beeson and JT Marcinkowski had also a couple of good saves. Galaxy hit the crossbar. And so it felt like when the Quakes brought on Shea Salinas and Chris Wondolowski, like it was sort of their moment to do exactly what they did in the RSL game, which was totally turn it around and score 2 goals, come back from behind. And I think they really raised the level. They had immediately created a couple of good chances. And when they came on, it felt like the Quakes had a game plan. They knew what they were doing, getting the ball wide and putting it into the box, cutbacks for Wondo, crosses into the box. And that really wasn't the case earlier in the game. It didn't feel like they had a really coherent attacking plan other than sort of hit the ball long to Cade Cowell and hope that he creates something. So when Chris Wondolowski, Shea Salinas came on, that was sort of the turning point where they it felt like they had momentum, but it didn't work out in the end.
Yeah, I would say that I think one of the things that is maybe a good thing for Almeyda is that he is willing to make huge changes in the middle of the game to try and jumpstart something. I mean, a lot of coaches are really conservative and they're not used to having 5 substitutes. And so they just want to kind of proceed, cautiously in the way that they normally would. And he sort of throws caution to the wind. Let's bring on a line change. Let's do 3 subs at once and around the hour mark, and let's see what we can do. Let's push for a result. I think at this point in the context of the season on the losing streak, you have to start to wonder, should maybe more changes be made to the starting lineup, or should there be kind of different types of shakeups in order to try and facilitate, a change in the form and in the results for the team? Because I think that it can be useful to have that in your pocket. And I understand why Wondo is coming off the bench, because he really is good about running around for 30 minutes and just giving his all and changing the game and changing the look for the Earthquakes. But yeah, I mean, I don't think at this point it's predictable necessarily. I still don't think that teams can really, account for the energy that they're going to have to expend once the 3 subs come on at once at the hour mark. But it still is a little bit concerning. And something I think that, it would be nice to maybe see a few tweaks on moving forward.
I mean, it's predictable is it's verging on that, right? It's kind of trending towards the direction where, unfortunately, we know that kind of line change is coming, and we know that he's going to most of the times he'll replace both fullbacks. Most of the time he'll replace the forwards and the wingers kind of in sequence. And other than introducing energy, which is positive, it's not consistently led to a change of results for the better. In this game, it did. They did improve after the substitutions. And it kind of, the funny thing is, you get Shea Salinas, who's at least useful on the left wing. Siad Hadji, there are things he isn't as good at, but his dribbling ability is the best on the team. And he has some technique and skill that no one else has. There are reasons why Almeyda isn't playing him for 90 minutes every single game. And, I think that it's the things that you can see as a fan are so obviously good that the things you're paying less attention to maybe get overlooked. But what it shows is, I genuinely, I don't know. I mean, maybe Shea Salinas can't go 90 minutes. I don't know what Carlos Ferreiro offers the team that Shea Salinas isn't as good at or better. And for Andy Rios and Chofis, it's kind of 50-50 for me on how well Chofis actually had a nice mazy run or two where he did some interplay today to open things up. And that's what you're really looking for from number 10 is one or two moments of unlocking in defense. But there's a couple of places there where they're not pulling their own weight. And the funny thing is that's kind of having this knock-on drag down effect across the board. Christian Espinosa has been very quiet this season. We should just go out and say that. He's still very high quality. We still really like what he brings, but I think that he gets more and more isolated if Chofis and Fierro aren't pulling their weight. Same thing's happening to Cade Cowell. Not getting a lot of touches, and when he does, they typically are very far out wide to get on the ball at all. So yeah, something needs to change to get those guys on the ball. Obviously, not having Yule is a big part of that. But if you don't have Yule, you need other people who can transition the ball up the field. A dribbler like Siad Hadji is the kind of guy you need.
And yet, when those subs were made, Siad Hadji came on in the 74th minute, made his own impact, and added another dimension to the attack. But when the changes were made in the 62nd minute, another thing that I noticed is that, as you kind of mentioned, Colin, that you weren't seeing enough from Fierro. And actually, Fierro's change or style of play did change slightly once, especially when Shea Salinas came on. Right. So he pushed the ball to the end line. We saw a lot more of the Quakes spreading the Galaxy defense and taking shots from outside the 18-yard box. But unfortunately for the Quakes, as you guys saw, a lot of those shots were kind of low powered. They weren't really threatening the goalkeeper. And Colin, you already mentioned that Jonathan Bond had a bunch of saves. He had 12. I just checked it a moment ago. Now, what's interesting also, I'm checking the stats on SofaScore right now. I've never seen a player get a 10 on that stats website, and he actually got a 10. But he did make a couple nice saves as well. But the thing I wanted to talk about, guys, is Shea Salinas comes on, Chris Wondolowski comes on. They make clear differences for this team. And then, to the chagrin of a lot of Quakes fans, Andy Rios comes onto the pitch. What sort of an impact, if any, did we see from Andy Rios? Alex, I saw you kind of a slight nod there. It looks like you have something you want to say about this substitution.
I mean, this is just a loaded question, Phil, just because Andy Rios has been on the receiving end of a lot of hate from Quakes fans over the last couple of weeks. And I think it's mostly just about the lack of end product, the lack of finishing. I think that, and I've said this before on the show, last season he, I think, found a really good productive role in sort of the second pivot role in number 10 position. And he played that, I think, quite well and contributed a lot. But this season, he just hasn't found the right role in this team. And he's just really struggling to produce going forward. It doesn't look like he's connecting much. And, the chances that he does get, he's not putting away. He had another one today that I think he really needs to put in the back of the net that would have totally changed the game for the Quakes and could have gotten them a result. And so, yes, Andy Rios was disappointing tonight, but I don't think at this stage that a lot of people are expecting a ton from him. So I think it's, sort of more that Matias Almeyda has to look towards the other players. And the question for me becomes, do you start Chris Wondolowski instead of Cade Cowell? Because Cade Cowell is now scoreless in 3 or 4 games. He's not really finding the spaces in behind that he did early in the season that made him successful. do you change it up? Do you start Chris Wondolowski up top, even though he might not be able to go the full 90 minutes because, he's now 39 years old and just doesn't have the legs. Even if he can't go the full 90 minutes, do you change up the starting lineup, bring in Wondo just to go with a different look? And I think the answer might be yes at this point. I think they need a change in there. And I also want to respond a little bit to some of the points that Colin made about, Fierro and Hadji, because I thought Fierro played pretty well. And I think that he adds a lot. The thing that he adds to this team is crossing from the right side in those late game situations. I think he can whip in those dangerous balls better than any of the other Quakes players on the right side. And the reason I think that he might have not been able to do that in this game at the end of the match is because he was put in the number 10 position. He was put centrally, which I don't think that's the right role for him. I think you need him out wide on the right in those late game situations. So that was something that struck me as odd. But then again, Hadji did play really well, as you said, Colin. I think that was a standout performance from him. He looked really dangerous taking players on 1v1 on the dribble. So yeah, there was some bright spots, I think, from Hadji for the Quakes. I thought Chofis played pretty well in the first half as well. So that's another bright spot. But it's the end product just isn't there right now. And that's got to be really frustrating for Matias.
Could I just say one thing about this end product? And I think that it kind of gets partially to a much bigger discussion about who this organization is signing and how they're going about it. I actually think in this game, there was very few of those really high XG chances where it's more about finishing than it is about the chance. I think here there was a lot, an accumulation of a bunch of smaller chances, and mostly only in that very late game state where they were chasing the game and Galaxy had sat back and all that. That's kind of, to me, I don't think this is a finishing issue. They need to get quality finishing one notch above that, and to happen, or those chance generation needs to happen earlier in the game than just when they're chasing it. To me, that kind of gets us to that broader question. There's a couple of questions in the chat who have mentioned this of what is going on with this organization and who's making these signings. I would say this is a point that I have made kind of in private a little bit, which is football managers do have a range of different levels of authority in their signings for their clubs. But a guy like Almeyda does not join San Jose unless he basically is given the full right to say yes or no to a player. That doesn't mean he's originating every signing, doesn't mean, that the technical staff isn't suggesting something to him. But Jesse Fioranelli is not going to sign a guy that Almeyda says no to, and he's going to try to make an effort at least to sign guys that he says yes to. Especially the guys that we're talking about here whose value for money is questionable. I mean, again, Fierro might have some virtues. He does. I just don't see what he brings that Shea Salinas doesn't as a wide player. I don't see what he brings that Kate Cowell doesn't if you're talking about somebody who's going more forward. I mean, by crosses from the right, I don't see what he brings that Christian Espinosa doesn't bring. He's, a jack of all trades, perhaps master of none. That actually even might be charitable. But here's the problem. His cap hit is like $1 million a year. Andy Rios, his cap hit is like $1 million a year. Those are guys that Almeyda insisted on and brought in. He also insisted on Chofis and Alanis, who are highly paid players who are doing better than those two, perhaps, but still it's a little bit questionable. Luciano Albacassis is on $400,000 a year. He hasn't successfully displaced Tommy Thompson, who's making less than half of that. Daniel Vega is making $250 a year. Is barely a backup keeper. Almeyda is married to his guys, and there are ways in which that works, but there's ways in which that's not working, and that's coming home to roost right now. You can't miss. If you're going to be one of the lower spending teams in the league, you can't miss on all of your big signings.
Okay, maybe we can take a moment to shift here. Alex, I was thinking about you when you made this, or when I noticed during the match that the Quakes were struggling to build out of the back. I know this is something that you mentioned during the Houston game, and you asked Matias Almeyda a question in regards to this, and then you mentioned it in the Slack as well. And I kind of wanted to bring it back around to you to see what your thoughts are now that we've had an opportunity to kind of watch through the match, see the Quakes shift and play around the 62nd minute. They were struggling to build up before. We had some instances in the second half. What are your thoughts regarding the build up, and is this something that is going to continue to be an issue for the Quakes? First,
I think we need to go to the post-match press conference, Phil, with Matias Almeyda, if I'm not mistaken, and Alicia will also be heading over there right now.
Outstanding. And we didn't get a chance to say goodbye to Alicia before she left, but really great to have her on. Anyway, going to the press conference.
0 loss against the Galaxy. We can go ahead and get started with questions in the same order, English first, and then we will proceed to Spanish after. So let's kick it off with Alicia Rodriguez. Alicia?
Thank you. Matias, condolences on the loss tonight. Wanted to ask how you felt the game went, and it seemed like you guys pushed for an equalizer really at the end, and it just didn't go in. And how are you feeling? How are you explaining this run where you guys have only scored 1 goal in 4 games?
Quería preguntar sobre cómo pensás que se desarrolló el partido, que pareció que al final salió a buscar el empate un poco más. ¿Cuáles son tus sensaciones y también qué pensabas ahora que el equipo solamente metió 1 gol en 4 partidos?
Bueno, las sensaciones son extrañas.
The feelings are strange.
Creo que tengo un montón de pensamientos
I think I have a lot of thoughts,
de todo tipo
all kinds,
y prefiero guardármelo.
and I'd rather keep them to myself.
Thank you. Next up, Alex Morgan. Alex? Alex, we'll come back to you. Next up, Fabian Rankel. Fabian?
Thank you, Matias, for your time today.
Thank you.
With Andy Rios coming out there on the field, how did you think he played and brought energy to the team? Thank you.
Cuando entró Andy, ¿cómo pensás que jugó y qué pensás de la energía que trajo?
Yo no analizo a un jugador nunca,
I never analyze a single player.
analizo al equipo.
I analyze the team.
Y es muy pronto para analizar el equipo porque, como dije, hoy realmente tengo sensaciones muy extrañas.
And it's too soon to analyze the team. Like I said, right now I have really strange feelings.
Tomar el tiempo para analizar el equipo y uno por uno ellos.
And then I'll take the time to analyze the team and then one by one.
Muchísimas gracias.
Bueno,
I'm having to
Wow.
rejoin here in another briefly. We're having some technical difficulties, but
Oh, okay. I
I'll
was
bring.
going to say that was short. It's good. Well, we'll hang out for a minute while we wait for that to come back then.
By the way, fascinating from Matias Almeyda there saying, I'm going to keep my feelings to myself. You know, that's notable.
Y me pregunto si en medio de todo esto pasando, por tu cabeza te has planteado la posibilidad de no seguir más, de decir, no puedo hacer más. ¿Te lo has planteado?
siempre uno se plantea eso. Y eso lleva un tiempo, un proceso. Yo después de lo que he vivido con mi padre, todo lo que viene después está para abajo. Digamos que acepto las derrotas, acepto las victorias, los empates. Después de eso creo que no. Lo otro, esto es mi trabajo, es fútbol. Y bueno, a veces se da así. Pero no se pierde en el fútbol porque se pierde. Hay un montón de cosas porque se pierde, como cuando se gana. Entonces, bueno, analizaré todo.
Gracias, Matías.
Por nada.
Thank you. Next up, John Rojas. John?
Pues Pedro, Matías, gracias. Un poquito en esa misma línea. Es impotencia de sentir que no hay mucho más que hacer con las herramientas que hay hoy.
No. Creo que yo estoy en el fútbol hace 30 años más o menos, ¿no? Y he crecido con una mentalidad ganadora. He ganado como jugador, he ganado como entrenador. Y no me gusta perder, entonces, menos los clásicos. Esto es para analizarlo bien, más frío, más pensante, y ver si en algún momento siento que yo no puedo dar más, bueno, lo diré. Esto es simple como la vida. Si siento que yo no la transmito más, o el cuerpo técnico y yo en grupo se lo diremos, se lo haremos saber a la gente que tiene que saber. Pero hemos pasado por estos procesos y bueno, hay que... si me pone así, el perder es porque no me da lo mismo. El día que me dé lo mismo, me dedico otra vez al campo, como cuando dejé el fútbol a los 30 años.
Thank you. And let's come back to Alex Morgan. Alex?
Unmuted.
Hi, Matias. Thank you for joining us tonight. It's good to speak to you. The team has only scored 1 goal in your last 4 games, and the starting lineup up front has been, very much the same for these last 4 games, and you've kind of made similar substitutions, bringing on Chris Wondolowski, Shea Salinas when you're chasing the game. Do you feel pressure to change things up, to try different, combinations, different things, because the team hasn't, that setup hasn't produced goals in the last couple games?
Muted.
En los últimos 4 partidos el equipo solo convirtió un gol y los delanteros en los últimos partidos han sido más o menos los mismos y los cambios han sido parecidos también, poniéndolo a Wondo y a Shea Salinas cuando están buscando el partido. Si ahora sentís algún tipo de presión de cambiar los delanteros con el hecho que no están metiendo goles.
No, presión no. Presión creo que debe tener un padre que no le puede dar de comer a un hijo.
I'm not feeling pressure. Pressure is when a parent can't feed their child.
Yo soy el responsable de poner a los jugadores que elijo de arranque.
I'm responsible choosing the starters.
Porque considero que así me gusta arrancar los partidos.
This is how I like to start the games.
Han tenido toda la posibilidad de jugar.
They've all had chances to play.
Y han tenido toda la posibilidad de convertir.
And they've all had chances to score.
Inclusive hasta con un penal.
Even with a penalty.
Y hay momentos que los partidos son así, las rachas son así, se cierra, no entra el balón y hay que trabajar más.
There are moments where football like this, the ball doesn't go in, the goal shuts down.
Hay que darle tranquilidad a ellos.
We have to give them calmness.
Porque creo que pasa por una cuestión también de confianza.
I think it also goes through a matter of confidence.
Nosotros le dedicamos una vez a la semana solo a la definición.
We dedicate 1 day a week just to finishing.
Después hacemos juegos para definir.
Then we have games to finish.
Y yo seguiré pensando a ver si hay otro trabajo más que pueda hacer para lo que es la definición.
And I'll think about if there's any other work we could do for finishing.
Pero tengo hasta el número que patea cada jugador por semana.
But I even have the number of how many shots each player shoots a week.
Y bueno, me tengo que conformar que a veces van a hacer los goles, a veces no. Es así.
And I'll have to be conformed with sometimes they'll score, other times they won't. That's the way it is.
Thank you, Matias, and thank you, Agustin. We will be bringing in a player shortly.
Okay, we got to talk about these comments really quickly here. Alex, with your question, you basically asked him if there were going to be necessary changes made, right? And does he feel the pressure to make those changes? And it's interesting that he responded with making some changes perhaps in their training or build up to the matches, right? Because they're not scoring. So I don't know, your thoughts regarding Matias's answer to your question, Alex?
I mean, he just looked kind of dejected,
Agreed.
In the last couple of weeks, he's obviously the Quakes have. He's looked frustrated on the touchline, especially after the Sporting Kansas City game. He had some weird touchline expressions and antics, and we didn't get really any shots of him tonight. But I'll bet you it was a lot of the same because there just wasn't enough going forward for the Quakes, and that's what he talked about in answering my question. That they're working on finishing all week. They have a day dedicated to finishing. He's tracking it in practice, very closely. And then they're just not doing it in the games. And I mean, a part of it, I think, is almost misplacing the blame, because it's not just finishing. It's also, as Colin was saying, about chance creation. And they weren't doing enough of that in the first half. And that's why I was asking him about, do you change the starting lineup? Do you change the combination that you're using up top? Because it's mostly, I think, about, adding new threats. and changing it up so that they're catching teams on the back foot. Right now, it feels like they're very predictable going forward. And, even though I think, it might make sense logically on paper, you start with Cade Cowell up top. He tries to find space and bullies the defenders. And then you bring on Wondolowski at the end to sort of, when they're tired, find those pockets of space. Even though that might make sense on paper, it's just really easy to read right now. And I think that they just need, to find a new threat going forward to change it up. And he spoke about, pressure. He almost turned it into a question about, does he feel pressure? And I know last week we heard a lot from him about sort of the bigger organizational topics and, almost throwing some shade at the ownership in terms of noting the disparities between the amount that the Quakes are spending and the amount that other teams are spending. And it almost felt like he was veering a little bit in that direction again this time with some, I think, deeper seated frustrations that he's feeling.
Well, if he doesn't feel pressure, he should, because ownership. So the fans, a lot of the fans, they resonate with Matias because he's a much more charismatic, figure, and his values and his style when it works is really, remarkable. But ownership they were just about one game away from firing him last fall, and the LAFC result happened. And it's because they weren't convinced that he was improving the team. It's actually remarkable. If you look at their 2019 statistics versus their 2020 statistics, they were much worse on the underlying measures in 2020 than they were in 2019. And that's not good when you're having a team going backwards as you're adding things to it. They've been better this year than they were in that horrible stretch. But I'm not entirely convinced that there's players who are necessarily getting better. One of the reasons, though, that I mentioned that is soccer is an early development cycle as far as the sports go. By the time you're 25 years old, you're more or less the player you're going to be. You maybe improve a little bit here or there, but your style, your general skill set is kind of bedded in. And most of the Quakes' major contributors are at that threshold or above it. So for me, focusing on finishing drills in practice is no match for putting the right personnel on the field, because improve just tiny marginal improvements on finishing for some people is just not, these are mostly veteran footballers, and that's not what's going to make the difference. And as Alex pointed out, it's actually, the problem is one phase before that. It's not like Chris Wondolowski had a bunch of wide open looks today that he didn't convert. It's just there weren't a lot of shots that were inside the box that had clean looks, and that creation is the problem. And there's only a couple guys on this team who can create. Chofis can create. He's been a little erratic, but he can create. Haji can create. Espinosa can create. I don't know if there's anybody else in the team who can. And I think that Jackson Ewell, vision is excellent though it is just better suited to a deeper role. And if you're playing him in a number 10, it's you're not getting the best out of him. So.
Okay. What I do want to mention really quickly that's related to this, you talk about chance creation. There was a moment late in the match in which Tommy Thompson had this just like cutting run right through the defense, and he created a chance there. Now, maybe that's not what we should expect from the right back position, but the reason why I feel like this is important to mention here is Tommy Thompson came into the match as the captain since Jackson Ewell wasn't here, and he adopted that leadership role. Which Jamin Moore mentioned on Twitter that this is the first homegrown Quakes player to have that role for the team. But I wanted to highlight Tommy Thompson before we move on, because I feel that overall in this match, like, he had some really strong moments. And prior to the match, one big concern that I had was his play against Kevin Cabral. Cabral is the young designated player for the LA Galaxy, who they just recently brought in from France, which is actually really rare to see in MLS, a young European player coming to play here. You normally see guys coming over from South America or other places, right? So they bring in Cabral, who played for Valenciennes in France. And if you look online, there's not a lot of scouting on him to find, like, at a quick glance. You see a lot of the normal stuff. Oh, he's a speedy guy. He does this and that. But I watched some of the highlights, and I noticed that he's actually a pretty clever player. And we saw it in this match. And Tommy had at least two instances in which I saw Cabral kind of get the better of him. But overall, I think Tommy Thompson adapted well in that position. And especially, though, the thing that we haven't talked about yet that's really important to bring up is the addition of Judson back into this lineup, and how he was able to help cover some of those deficiencies that we've seen from the defense as well. So, Judson being back on the pitch with the team playing as many minutes as he did. Let's talk about the impact that he has for this team and kind of what they've been missing with that. Alex, maybe you can jump in here and give some of your thoughts in regards to it.
Yeah, I mean, there was a couple changes in the back line. First of all, Judson comes in for the midfield for Jackson Ewell, who is away at U.S. men's national team camp. And to be honest, I think Judson looked like he was kind of off the pace. I know that Matias Almeyda has been, very critical of his fitness. He missed most of preseason because he was away trying to get a green card. And Matias basically said that he came back 15 pounds overweight and unfit. And, it's been 6 to 8 weeks now. You'd think that would be enough time for a professional soccer player to get fit again. But I wasn't convinced today. This was the first time that we've seen him starting in the midfield this season. And, usually last season he was all over the place, cutting balls off all over the midfield, really an anchor in front of the back line. But tonight, I just thought he was a step behind it. When the Galaxy played those combinations through the middle, when they attacked directly, down the heart of San Jose's defense, they looked really dangerous and the Quakes looked vulnerable. And, in terms of Tommy Thompson, I actually thought that, Cabral, looked quite good and he got the better of Tommy Thompson because Tommy Thompson, even though his leadership, he has great leadership skills. I mean, he just doesn't have the pace to go up against MLS's best wingers. And I thought that was a vulnerability for the Quakes today. And I think there is sort of a ceiling for how good San Jose's defense can get so long as, him and Flo are playing on the same side. Because there was one play in which Cabral just literally ran right by Tommy, then ran right by Flo. And that should have been a goal probably. That was Tanner Beeson's goal line clearance that saved the Quakes in that situation. But I thought that was a vulnerability for the Quakes.
Well, I do have to say I was quite impressed with Tommy's ability to adapt to it otherwise. Because, yes, there were a couple early moments in which they looked vulnerable with Cabral. But then I think ultimately Cabral didn't have a very good performance. I have to disagree with you there. And I'm also going to disagree with you on the point about Judson. I think him coming in and playing 90 minutes after not doing that all season, I mean, it was an own goal that caused a loss of points here for the team. There were a lot of opportunities that the Quakes allowed, but I thought, considering he goes the full 90, he steps in, like, to me, in a lot of moments, he looked like the Judson of old, the one who's going to go in and make, run back and make some of those saving runs, which we also saw from some of the other players. Paul Marie had a big moment in the match, and we saw Tanner Beeson with the goal line clearance. So I'm not going to sing his praises or anything, but I thought, like, for a first match where Judson went a full 90, I was actually content with this performance. And Colin, I'm interested to hear what you think, since we're on two separate sides of this. Alex and I, you want to be the tiebreaker here?
I'm going to go actually even farther than Phil did on the pro Judson take here. And the reason, definitely some rust, no doubt about it. There's definitely something weird going on with him and Almeyda and their, in his fitness levels. He's quite frankly a relatively small man to be 15 pounds overweight. So like that's like a pretty big miss if you're a professional player. So there's something weird going on there. In this game, though, he had 5 interceptions and 2 tackles. That's a lot. 5 interceptions is a lot. And I remember noticing a couple of them in particular, those, classic, he gets a step early and jumps forward and it starts a counterattack. Now, was he sharp in his passing? Some yes and no, but he was actually asked to do quite a bit. He was dropping in between the center backs to receive the ball under pressure a lot. I actually thought it was pretty dang good, given that he hasn't been playing in a long time. Definitely some rust. But to me, he showed what the Judson of old was. I think that in some ways, one of the things that made him look worse was the pairing with Remedi is not a natural one at all. Remedi plays a different style than he does, but Remedi is better next to a Jackson Ewell, who's a ball progressor, than to a Judson, who's a ball winner. Remedi is a little bit more of like a guy who's going to retain the ball and keep it ticking over. And contribute some defensive work. I think that the combination with Judson didn't look so good. But if I was trying to narrow my aperture to just Judson, and with the caveat that he hasn't been playing much recently, I was like, yep, this is the Judson of old. He's in there, and it's just going to be a matter of kind of getting him up to speed in terms of the actual games, not just physical fitness.
So one other thing, Colin, is I think another way to frame this or to consider it is like this team looks a lot different this year than they looked last year in terms of their performance. And I think there were moments last year where the Quakes were like so bad that Judson's performance and his consistency over the course of the season really made him stand like head and shoulders above the rest of the team. And I kind of feel like he comes in here and at a lot of levels, I know that the team just lost 4 games in a row, all right? Like I get that. But like in a lot of ways, the team has like looked better. So Judson comes in and he, like you said, like the Judson of old, he comes in and does this thing. So anyway, Alex, you have any further thoughts in regards to that rebuttal to what we just stated on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm willing to give Judson a couple weeks to regain match fitness and to try to figure out the partnership with Remedi. It did look pretty unnatural in there. And I think that was one of the reasons why they struggled in the buildup is because they just didn't know, where each other were checking into the spaces. And it ended up actually that Chofis was dropping really deep. And they sort of, in the buildup phase, almost moved Remedi to the 10 just because they weren't getting on the ball and they weren't moving the ball through the midfield a lot. So I'm almost more concerned about actually the attacking phase of play with that partnership than I am the defensive phase of play, because with Judson in there in the defensive phase of play, he can usually cover a lot of ground by himself. But in the attacking phase of play, I think they're going to have to work on that on the training ground a lot. So yeah, I'm willing to give Judson a couple weeks to regain match fitness, and certainly, he has the starting spot for the foreseeable future as long as Jackson's gone. The Quakes don't have any other viable options behind him, I think.
Okay, I want to take a second to reset here for anybody who just joined us on the Aftershock here. I want to quickly go over some of our social media stuff where you can follow us. You can follow our Twitter at Quakes Epicenter. They are the ones who are the host for the Aftershock podcast. You can also find information about that on the website, www.quakesepicenter.com. If you didn't have a chance to see Alicia Rodriguez, she joined us quite for the first section of the show, I should say. And you can follow her at Soccer Musing. She has a lot of great insight into this match, especially because she doesn't just cover the San Jose Earthquakes. She also covers the LA Galaxy for LAG Confidential, and which is through SB Nation. So I would strongly recommend following her as well, and also following Centerline Soccer, who she is working with. So, and if you want to follow Alex Morgan and Colin Etnire, as you should, as I do, Alex Morgan as Quakes_talk. And Colin Etnire.
Well, my Twitter's now retired, but you can usually I'm tweeting through the Quakes Epicenter account.
The Quakes Epicenter, yeah. So that's the other thing. Okay, guys. So we will have Chris Wondolowski in the presser momentarily. So perhaps before we get to that, we can move on to another topic to kind of fill in some of the time until we get there. So one thing that we haven't talked about too much here is the play from the wings, right? We did kind of briefly mention Fierro and Christian Espinoza, but maybe that's because largely there wasn't much there. It was kind of like a factor that didn't contribute to the match. So, Colin, your thought on
a quick one. One of the things that Fierro contributes is, the commitment, the running, the tracking, or whatever. So you could say he's more defensively solid. One of the problems, though, is one-dimensional wingers, they can key on you. So having an offensive threat actually keeps the opposing fullback back. And so there's a certain amount in which posing an offensive threat actually improves your ability to defend against getting overloaded, because the opposing fullback has to respect you as an offensive threat. No one is respecting Carlos Fierro in terms of an offensive threat. It's actually one of the reasons why Christian Espinoza is a really good solution on the right wing, because he forces their opposing fullback back, and he does the track back work. Fierro is really only doing the track back work and doesn't force the opposing opponent back, and that's a problem. And I think that's why I'm saying I don't know what he's bringing that Shea Salinas isn't bringing. Again, Shea is on the older side now. He might not be able to do 90 minutes, but at least Shea can get by his man and has to cause a little bit of respect given.
I would be on board with Shea Salinas starting. I actually agree with that, Colin. I think that would be it's a hot take, but I think it would be sort of a catalyst. I think it would change the way that the Quakes play. I think it would be more balls in the box, and I think that would be a useful change just to mix things up. And I'm seeing a comment here that says Espinoza remains a step down from last season, and I think that's true. I think he contributed 1 goal in the FC Dallas match from a Cade Cowell assist. But other than that, he really hasn't looked as dangerous. And it used to be that, San Jose's entire attack was going through him, and he was kind of carrying the team. But now he's been kind of invisible. And, it's I think almost a chicken and egg question. Is he playing poorly because the Quakes aren't getting him the ball, or are the Quakes looking for other options because he's just not been playing well? And I think that a part of me just wants to see what it would be like, see what the outcome would be if the Quakes started just looking for him every time they get the ball, every time they pick their head up, just trying to find Espinosa. And if they went back to what that made them successful last season, which was trying to find Espinosa in behind and playing through Espinosa, if that would be sort of a viable solution to this attacking conundrum that Matias Almeyda is facing, because he made the sort of interesting comment in the press conference where he said he has a lot of thoughts about the offense and he didn't want to share any of them with us, probably because they're not very good thoughts about this offense. But that was sort of an interesting change in tone and candor from Matias, not wanting to share any of that with us and sort of biting his tongue in the press conference.
So that gets me thinking about one element of the Quake style of play that's really changed since Cade Cowell has become the starting forward. We haven't seen as much of Chris Wondolowski. Is the team pushing the attack towards the end line, which I feel like we saw a lot with Nick Lima when he was one of the fullbacks with this team. And we did see quite a bit of that with Christian Espinoza and kind of sending the ball back across the face of goal. I have noticed that that's not really an element of the game that we're seeing with this team. And especially with, I think, Colin, you mentioned this before, Cade Cowell likes to have he likes to be facing goal with the ball at his feet, right, rather than his back to goal. So just as another thing to take note of as we're looking at this team is like when they start to integrate that style of play where they're pushing the ball to the end line and sending balls back across, such as we saw with Shea Salinas when he came in later in the match, like, is that perhaps one thing that we can see change, that Matias Almeyda, that's like a simple change that he can make to improve the quality of the offense in this team? So again, Colin, I want to go back to you here because we've kind of seen Cade Cowell in a couple different positions in the last 2 to 3 games. Is he being utilized effectively in his position as he's playing, or like, is there more to see, or should perhaps Matias Almeyda go back to starting Chris Wondolowski in the forward position?
I think a sharper tactical analyst than me would probably have more complete thoughts about this, but it's obviously no secret that Cade's production has slipped dramatically since those first couple games. He's certainly not surprising anyone. Every team will have seen him on tape and known roughly what he can do. And he doesn't have that many tricks in his back pocket because he's 17 years old and he hasn't learned all the tricks yet. So once every team kind of has circled him in red ink and said, this is a big, strong, fast player, and you got to make sure that he doesn't overwhelm you physically, then you slow him down. But then the other thing is they've very successfully cut off the service into him. And Chofis has not really gotten connected with him. Fierro has definitely not gotten connected with him in this game, and that's kind of cut off his oxygen. And by the way, to the Espinosa thing, I definitely think he's taken a step down from last year. He's been quieter, but if you look at the stats, he is still leading the team in key passes. He's still leading the team in successful take-on dribbles. He's second on the team in shots behind Cowell. He has a goal and 2 assists. And by the way, 2 assists is second on the team. So he's not nothing. He's contributing something, and he's combined better with some of those other guys. I think that, Chofis has to take a step up and Fierro has to take a step off if you want to get the best out of Cade. An alternative conception of how to do this is it could be Wando. It could be going into the transfer market over the summer and getting a target striker, putting Cade out on the wing. So like when he was put on the wing, I don't remember, it was the last game against SKC that Wando started up top. Cade looked lost on the wing too. So it wasn't just a matter of where he was being played. It's about how are you getting those combinations in with him. And if you have a really talented target striker to bring other people into play, you could do it.
Ding, ding, ding. I think that is the right answer, Colin. There was a lot of talk, a lot of disappointment actually over the offseason. The Quakes didn't sign a new number 9, a new striker. And, in the first couple of games of the season, after, Cade had such a breakout stretch, maybe we were thinking, they don't really need a new number 9, if Cade is going to take that spot. But I think the last 4 games have shown us that the Quakes could really use another option up there. And so I'd be very curious if that changes Jesse Fiorinelli's offseason plans. I know they have room to sign 2 players. Basically, they did some accounting changes, making Chofis a DP, and you had a whole video about all the sort of roster mechanics that they did in order to free up 2 international spots, basically, to make 2 moves this summer. One of them is, they've made very clear is going to be a center back, but the other one, they sort of have an option to use as a wild card up top and to try to bring in a number 9 or maybe a left winger or maybe somebody in there in order to change things up. And so I think if this stretch continues and if the Quakes aren't able to turn it around, I think they probably have to at some point turn to the transfer market to try to inject some energy into this team.
I want to play to the audience for a second here. My colleague Dom Skipper on Quakes After 90 said that the Earthquakes should simply cut ties with Andy Rios at this point, cut their losses, and then move on from that. I'm curious as to what you guys think about that. If that was an opportunity that arose for the organization, should the Quakes simply move past Andy Rios, as Dom would say, as a big organization would do in other major sports? Move away, show a sign that they are the ones with the leverage, they are the ones with the power. Or do they continue to hold on to Andy Rios and hope for him to find magic somewhere?
I mean, I don't think they're going to do that at all, because I think he is one of Matias Almeyda's guys and one of Matias Almeyda's signings, guys that Matias Almeyda vouched for. And I just don't see Matias, given his personal connection with Rios, bailing on him like that. I think that Rios, whether we like it or not, is here to stay, just because Almeyda sticks by his guys, and that's very important in his philosophy. So I don't think Matias would cut ties with Rios or anything. I think if there was an opportunity to trade him, if there were another 9 in Major League Soccer that became available and that was an option, I think the Quakes should explore that. Absolutely.
I think those opportunities are available, Alex, but is there a team that is willing to take on that salary and that player, given what they've seen with the Earthquakes, right?
I think they're kind of stuck with him at this point.
It's not going to be in MLS, certainly. And one of the things that, because you have to trade the contract as it is within MLS, they could use their once-a-year buyout option, which would potentially, by the way, about the salary situation, they have room to bring in at least 1 big player, with the TAM, the way that they were doing those accounting mechanisms. At second, you're not going to be looking at 2 DPs, though, or even 2 TAM players. The second player is going to have to be something else, like a U22 option, just given the moves that they made, given the roster as it is. They could rearrange some other things and create a space for a second big signing, but they kind of boxed themselves in a little bit to 1 big signing over the summer, and it's probably going to be that center back unless they do something else. That's the reason to go do it with Rios. I will say, though, there's no reason to do a buyout and truly cut him from the roster unless there is an economic value to doing so and there's no on-field value. Otherwise, you're giving away something for nothing. There is some on-field value. Andy Rios is not useless. He is just not, enough to justify his salary. If they can find a mechanism to get him off and they use that space to acquire a new guy and create that enough space for that second big purchase, perhaps. I will say, though, that he signed in the summer of 2019. It is highly unlikely that he has any guaranteed time on his contract beyond this year.
Questions, starting off with Alex.
Here we go to Wanda.
Unmuted. Muted.
That's a good one. I think that we went wrong by letting the game be open. At times that can suit us, but we knew coming into this game that was not our game plan. And, I think that the game got stretched a little bit too much and a little bit too open. That being said, we created a lot of opportunities and should have and could have, capitalized. And that's something that we've kind of been snake bit on these last couple games. And also a correlation of, I think why we've been struggling these last couple games.
Thank you, Wando. Next up, Alicia Rodriguez. Alicia?
Thank you. Chris, you guys were really hot for a while there, and the goals have just kind of dried up. I mean, you're going to have a break coming up. Like, what would you like to see the team working on during the break, or what do you think the team will be working on?
Yeah, I mean, one is executing the game plan, something that we need to work on. I think right now, I think we've gotten a little bit too much into, I guess, what would you want to call it, hero ball, or, one-on-one, where guys take it upon themselves and try to do something special. And I think that's the time, that times we have been dangerous, to be honest. And I think that things that we've been missing are, a lot of movement off the ball and, those connecting those passes. We've been missing a lot of easy passes. And when we connect those passes and use the outside the way that we should, then we are able to get a lot more crosses, be able to create more chances. And then that also opens up the middle as well, where you can slide passes in and, create room for Chofis, and he can do his magic as well. And so I think right now we're a little too stagnant all over. And, I think that, a touch or too many as well.
Thank you. Let's now go to Fabian Brankel.
Hi, Wando. Thank you for your time today.
No worries. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, so when you played in a lot of Clasicos, and how does this one rank in all of your Clasicos that you've played before? Thank you.
Not top 10. Out of there, kind of all blend together. But, it was a great atmosphere. It's cool to see fans. They're loud. They're into it. I love that. I love the rivalry. I love what it brings. It was definitely an open game. Probably pretty entertaining for fans, maybe. I think that for us, that wasn't necessarily the game plan. And, I think that we needed to execute as well. So, I don't think it goes into, one of our best.
Thank you, Wando.
Thank you. And last, we'll go to John Rojas. John?
Thanks, Pedro. Chris, thanks for the time. We saw a very concerned Matias, and he actually went on to say that that he will analyze this very thoroughly, and that he feels that he cannot connect anymore with the group, that the message is not being well resounding into the group. He will talk to the people that he has to talk. Do you guys feel something in that direction? Do you guys feel from him that he's not, feeling that he's not connecting enough with the message, or that something is not translated on the field the way you guys want it?
No. So I could be misinterpreting, but I think that his message is clear, and I think to a man we all understand it going in. And I think that it's a plan that will work and will be successful, but it has to be executed by all 11 guys. And if we're slipping up a little bit, or a little bit of misinterpretation or misunderstanding of where or how we go about, or even just the movements, but especially how we press. I think that was some, that led to the goal. We missed how to trigger our press and how to press correctly, and so those are the things that I believe that he's speaking upon, of what we need to do to be better and how to transmit that game plan into being better. I know Matias well. I know that he's taking these losses very personal, very, hard as well, along with all of us, and so, is he going to look inward and see what he can do better? Absolutely. But, I think that's what we're all going to do. And that's the main game plan. To a man, we all believe in his message and want to and need to implement it out there on the field. And that's on us that we've been lacking there a couple times.
Thank you, Wando, for your time, and thank you, everyone, for your questions.
Thank you, guys.
Wando candid as always in his responses, right? And optimistic at times, and yet very honest about what's going on with the team. So something I want to bring up, guys. I want to take us in this direction first, and then we can kind of round third base and go home, right? So Alicia Rodriguez asked the question, what did Wondo think the team would be working on in this extended break that they're going to have? Because the Quakes don't play again until June 19th in Austin, right? That's quite a stretch without playing a game. Wondo said, he specifically mentioned, quote, they were missing easy passes and that they were stagnant all over. And one thing we kind of talked about here on the show already was the kind of the lack of wing play and not getting enough crosses sent in. So just general thoughts, guys, about Wando's reaction to the performance of the team and how they are going to be spending their time, which might actually be much needed at this point, considering they just lost 4 games in a row. Colin, what do you think?
It's fascinating because Wondo and Almeyda are clearly close personally, and they resonate with each other, but they have very different mentalities and approaches. And you see it in the press conferences. Almeyda was saying things like, he basically was giving us the, like, I'm just here so I don't get fined speech at the beginning. Like I have strange feelings, but I don't know how, I don't want to share them with you right now. Wondo is actually citing a couple of specific tactical things on the defensive side of the ball. First of all, he said we're leaving the game too open, but then he very specifically cited we missed some pressing triggers and specifically talked about the goal, saying we missed some pressing triggers on that goal. Those are some tactical things that I think are important because they do actually put the onus on the players, and that's classic Wondo of taking responsibility for his element of it. But if we're kind of having this debate about, like, is it a Matias tactical problem or is it a problem with the players? That's basically saying, like, look, we had pressing triggers on that sequence that we missed. That's on us as players, and we have to pick that up. So I think it's an interesting kind of data point, and it's just so interesting that, he's obviously a veteran, he's a club legend, he's allowed to be as open as he wants to be, and he rewards us with that.
And I thought it was interesting how he said the game was too open, because I actually think that when the game is open and sort of back and forth, the Quakes thrive in those situations when there's a lot of space for them to attack. So that was interesting to me. I didn't entirely understand what he meant in that sense, but I think the pressing triggers, were really important because I think San Jose's press is probably the main way in which they can put the other team on the back foot, in which they can win the ball high up the field and sort of assert themselves. And the press has sort of been absent from the last couple of games. They haven't been successful in sort of winning the ball in those dangerous areas and creating dangerous transitions and moving the ball forward quickly. And so if there were one thing that I think that they should work on over this extended break, it would definitely be the press. That could be the trigger for them to turn it around. And as you were saying, Phil, I just think that this break comes at the perfect time for them to sort of mentally, physically, tactically reset. After this, losing streak of 4 games, to now have 2-3 weeks to work on all of those, various inadequacies that they've had. I think that will be really important for them. And, they're still at the point in the table and in the season where, if they rebound strongly, they could, climb their way right back up to the top of the table, or they could fall off. So I think, it entirely depends at this point on how they return and how they use their time over the break to get stronger.
Last thought on that, Phil, just before I let you wrap it all up. In Almeyda's first year with the Quakes in particular, but in portions of last year as well, they were a free scoring team. They were scoring a bunch of goals without having any particularly talented creators. And the reason why was the pressing system. They were putting so much pressure on other teams that they were, making terrible mistakes at the back, forced errors, and that was creating offense in and of itself without any particularly talented creators. So, and we have been analyzing in this broadcast about, like, Chofis isn't doing enough, the wings aren't doing enough on the ball. Off the ball is another valid way to create offense too, and I think that's something that's been lacking these last couple of games.
And that might be. I'm worried that is that problem starts with Cade Cowell up top, because he's kind of been uncomfortable with that pressing system, and I think Chris Wondolowski, one of the ways in which he raises the level when he comes on as a sub is sort of relentlessly chasing the ball when he comes on and winning the ball in those dangerous situations. And obviously he has had a lot longer to sort of learn how this pressing system works. So Cade Cowell, as much as he adds going forward, I think the jury's still out on his how he contributes to this pressing system. So I think that's another reason why you might want to change things up top. And very briefly, before we wrap up, I also just want to comment. One of the other things that concerned me was JT Marcinkowski's performance in goal. I thought it was very poor yet again. I think the first couple of games of the year, we were kind of saying, oh, it was just an off night for JT. He's looking a little shaky. But at this point, I think it's more than just an off night because his distribution has been, I think it's regressed quite a lot, actually. That was one of his best assets, one of the best assets that he had last year. But now he's just every single game giving away a couple of really bad passes, and the Quakes are getting punished for it. And another thing that he's struggling with is sort of the aerial challenges. He flapped at another cross in the first half, and the Galaxy hit the crossbar. That was a dangerous chance. And so I'm concerned about his performances in goal. I think he should absolutely be the number one. I think he's still better than Daniel Vega back there. But I'm worried at this point that this is starting to be a trend with JT Marcinkowski rather than sort of a one-off exception.
I do want to add a counterpoint here. I agree with what you're saying, Alex, but I think a good counterpoint here is the organization that JT Marcinkowski brings versus what we saw from Vega. And I know last year we got to hear quite a bit of that on the mic because there was no fans in the stadium, right, during the issues with COVID and everything. We got to kind of hear what kind of goalkeeper JT Marcinkowski is vocally. And that's one thing that Quakes fans also saw with John Bush, right? He was also very good at organizing his defense, calling guys back, finding the right position for his players. So just a counterpoint there, perhaps we can attribute some of the successes that the Quakes have had defensively to JT. But I also want to mention that like a lot of the unforced errors, yes, have come from that position, right? Colin, you mentioned the Quakes play a style that forces errors from the other team so that they can get possession and create opportunities. The last thing you want to do, though, when you're playing such a high press style of play is to commit unforced errors when you're going to be forcing your own, or the other team is going to be forcing you to be making errors throughout the match too, because of your high intensity of play. So your last thoughts on JT Marcinkowski, Colin, and then maybe we can go ahead and wrap this thing up.
It's not a skill thing with him about the putting the ball at his feet, because he's the Quakes' most talented keeper with his feet that we've probably ever had, actually. It seems like there's something mental here on two dimensions. There's kind of a confidence dimension, and then there's a decision-making dimension. And those are the things that don't feel like they're totally, refined and perhaps even a bit worse than the end of last year. But this is not about skill. With the aerial stuff and command of box, that's going to always be hard for him because he's a shorter keeper. But the stuff with his feet, that's purely in between his ears. That's not about lack of foot skill. Counterpoint to all of that, of course, this is actually his first season as a starter, and he's 24 years old. So, and that's relatively young as far as keepers go. So we could imagine him growing out of that. But yeah, there's definitely some worrying signs about his confidence and decision-making.
Okay, I want to thank everybody who's hung with us tonight on YouTube. This has been a really analysis-heavy show. Typically, we have a couple people coming in on the press conference, and we have a chance to kind of just talk about what their responses were to some of the questions from the journalists that we have on, including Alex and Jamin, who are normally on the show. So I wanted to thank all of you. There have been some really great comments. I want to highlight Calvin, who's had some really great comments especially. Thank you, Calvin, for commenting on the YouTube there, and everybody else as well. If you guys want to follow us on social media, again, we're at Quakes Epicenter. The Aftershock is a part of the Quakes Epicenter family, originally started by Colin Etnire. By the way, Colin, I don't know if there's anything else you want to mention about the Aftershock.
Well, so first of all, I got to credit my guy, Nate Patel, is the one who founded the Quakes Epicenter. I get to claim the founding of the Aftershock, which is what this is. And we actually did just get the rights to Coastin' by Zai and I, our intro music. So we're now going to be using that as our official music again. It's back, baby.
There you go. Zai and I is going to be back on the show. Okay, good. I'm glad you were okay saying that out loud, because that's kind of what I was leading to there. Anyway, I think I've already said the social media stuff, but again, at Quakes Talk for Alex Morgan, at Quakes Epicenter. Colin's usually posting on there. You can follow me at Phil. This is Phil. Go check out our website. It is awesome. The layout is brand new. www.quakesepicenter.com, and you can find our Patreon on there. You can become a patron for only $2 a month, where you'll get special access to early releases on articles and videos, and even like the video that just came out this week with Alicia Rodriguez, that was released to our patrons first. If you pay $5 a month, there is a second tier, $5 a month. You can also join our Slack, where some of the members of our YouTube, some of our Slack members, some of our patrons who've contributed $5 a month are in the YouTube tonight, and they can tell you how awesome it is. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. And I can't think of anything else, guys.
You got it.
Last bits
You
you want to
nailed
add
it.
on to that? I want to thank Alicia Rodriguez for joining us. Please follow her at Soccer Musings. Please go check out her work at Centerline Soccer for SB Nation. And as you can hear from the questions she was asking in the presser, she's incredibly thoughtful, and she writes some really great work, and it was awesome to have her on. Hopefully we can have her on back again in the future, next time the Quakes play another California team. So if there's nothing else, guys, I just want to tell everybody, thank you for joining us tonight. If you're listening in the podcast version, thank you for listening, and go Quakes.